So I talked about Mondstadt not too long ago and it was unscripted and it was pretty chill. And I actually really enjoyed making that video. So I'm making another one. This time it's Liyue because I really want to give Liyue the appreciation that it deserves. And just like my Mondstadt video, this is unscripted. It's just mostly me talking out of my ass. I did no research, so I'm sorry if I got some things wrong. I'm going off of memory here. But for context, I have played Genshin since the very beginning, like 1.0, and I've played it consistently over the last 5 years now. Oh my god, it's been 5 years since Mondstadt and Liyue. Wow. But anyway, it's safe to say that Liyue is actually the region that made me fell in love with Genshin, and I also think that it's the region or the nation that made a lot of people fall in love with Genshin in the first place. Now, don't get me wrong, I definitely think Mondstadt is more homey. Like, Mondstadt feels like home, but Liyue feels like a first love, if that makes sense. Mondstadt is very introductory, but Liyue is where the adventure felt like it really started for all of us and the traveler. I remember my first time exploring like through Mondstadt, and then I just saw this beautiful building from the distance. It's Wangshu Inn. Like, I was just standing in Stone Gate and there it was. There was Wangshu Inn and it was like sunset, I believe, in the game. And I was in awe. Like, the landscape of Liyue is just like on another level. But before we get into all that, I do feel like it's intentional that the feeling of adventure really kickstarted in Liyue. That's why Mondstadt is the prologue in the Archon quest and chapter 1 is Liyue. Where Mondstadt was beautiful in its simplicity, Liyue is beautiful in a way that it takes your breath away. Poyo is also a Chinese company and you can tell that they placed a lot of care into the region that's supposed to represent their homeland. Personally, for me, it's been a really pleasant experience to just experience pieces of Chinese culture through Liyue. One example that I can think of right at the top of my head right now is Yunjin and Chinese opera. Now, I'm not Chinese, I'm Southeast Asian, so I definitely had zero exposure to Chinese opera up until they introduced Yunjin to the game, and it's really beautiful. I feel like I wouldn't have seen this beautiful piece of art if not for this game, because I would just not be exposed to it. Don't quote me on this, but I've seen someone mention that the exposure Genshin gave internationally for Chinese opera is actually good. And not just internationally, but also within China itself. It's been able to reach the younger crowd because Chinese opera is usually an art form that's enjoyed by the older generation and not so much the younger generation. So having that in a game, a very popular game I might add, was definitely great. And I feel like just being able to introduce an entire art form across generations through a video game is pretty cool. It's not just the culture though, there's also the landscape of Liyue that's worth admiring. Obviously, Liyue is based on China and the mountains in China, and having this landscape to explore right after Mondstadt is so memorable. It's just so different, and just the change in scenery and also the music really added to how diverse this game was and just how much detail was added into the game, even though it was like patch 1.0. Okay, next up is the culture. Now, talking about landscape and Chinese culture, there's also one event that is so iconic in Genshin, and that event takes place in Liyue every year. I'm sure you know what it is. It's obviously the Lantern Rite. I feel like ever since the first Lantern Rite, it has always been so memorable. I remember seeing Liyue Harbor and I was already so enthralled by the architecture, the music, and just everything about the city. And then to see it again during Lantern Rite with all of the added decorations and the lighting, the lanterns and everything, it was magical. Like I said, I think Liyue is really just the place that you get to fall in love with this game over and over again. At least that's how it was for me. So seeing that for the first time was amazing. And then let's not forget that the Lantern Rite is also the equivalent of Chinese New Year in real life. So it's also a time where people and families gather together. So in Genshin's case, it's that one time of the year where the traveler will come back to Liyue and just see familiar faces and just have have a good time. It's like wherever you are in your Genshin journey, you will always return to Liyue every year to celebrate with familiar faces. And if you've been playing for a while, then you would be seeing characters that you've known for like 5 years now. And I think for the past 5 years, the Lantern Rite quests have been pretty fun. There are some misses, but I think the last 2 or 3 Lantern Rites had really great quests. I really like the one with Hu Tao because I think she got the character development that she deserved there. And I also really like the one with Gaming and also Shan Yun because where I'm from, Chinese New Year is usually celebrated with family, so there's a lot of family drama. And Gaming having the most Asian parent of all is, I feel like, something that a lot of people can probably relate to. I will talk about the characters more in a bit, but yeah, I really like that one. And obviously, I also really like the first Lantern Rite because I love Xiao as a character. And the first Lantern Rite, if you didn't know, is actually the first time the game introduced Xiao to all of us. It was patch 1.3, and I remember just being so excited. And the event quest, even though it was like not the greatest quest, I feel like it's still pretty wholesome. The quest was basically just trying to get Xiao to go to the Lantern Rite in Liyue Harbor. To be honest with you, I don't remember how the quest actually goes, but I do remember this cutscene, this pretty famous cutscene where Xiao is just like admiring the lanterns. If I'm not mistaken, that cutscene is also one of the first cutscenes that the game releases, like before it even released, like it was the preview cutscene. And it's still pretty damn great even till this day. Another thing that I've always found interesting and a key difference between Mondstadt and Liyue is just how they worship their archons. Obviously in Mondstadt, there's a big ass statue of Barbados right in the middle of the city. They have an entire church for him. People say praise Barbados all the time, but he's not actually around, or at least he's not actually like present. He's there, obviously, he's in the taverns every now and then, but he's not actively ruling over monsters. Zhongli, on the other hand, has been involved with Liyue for thousands of years. He has consistently guided his people every single year for thousands of years. What I find interesting is that the people of Mondstadt obviously have a lot of faith in Barbados. They love him, but the kind of respect that the people of Liyue have for Rex Lapis or Zhongli is just very different, and it's built upon thousands of years of consistently leading and guiding your people towards prosperity, because Liyue is pretty damn prosper. I like that the first 2 regions of the game gave us that contrast, you know? I think it's really cool world building. And of course, Liyue has a ton of fun and interesting characters, even way back in patch 1.2 and 1.3. Let's start with the big man himself, Zhongli. Zhongli, just like Venti, is a part of the 7 original archons, but it's also worth noting that Zhongli is significantly older than Venti, even though they're both ancient at this point. So Zhongli has been around for a very, very, very long time. And because Zhongli has been Liyue's leader and archon for a long time, you can meet other characters who obviously have a lot of respect for him. And not just the humans, but also the Adepti. Something interesting about Zhongli that comes to mind is just how different he is, like right now in the game versus how he used to be way back in the day when he was still like active as an archon. This man fought in the Archon War, and he was one of the most terrifying gods that you can probably bump into. It's very different from Venti because we know Venti was a wind spirit, so he really wasn't that much of a fighter to begin with. He's powerful, but he's not Zhongli level powerful. Like the stones in Guyun Stone Forest, that was Zhongli's spear during the Archon War when he took down other gods. That's some scary shit. And I also really like how we can just see traces of Zhongli or Rex Lapis throughout Liyue. Obviously, there's so many of them, but I'm just gonna be mentioning one, and that's because it's my favorite. For me, that is Guili Plains. So if you didn't know, Zhongli had this best friend, Guizhong, who is the goddess of dust, and they actually built Guili Plains together. It was a whole civilization back in the day. Liyue. And then the Archon War happened, and then Guizhong passed away during the Archon War. But the people who followed Guizhong and Zhongli named the place that they built together as Guili Plains. If you played through Genshin, you most likely have passed through this area. It's just north of the harbor. And of course, one of my favorite things about Zhongli is his relationships with other characters. I really like how, despite being retired, Zhongli has always had a good relationship with the Adeptis. Like, he's also responsible for saving Xiao from his previous master. And not just the Adeptis. I find it funny that Zhongli is also just working under Hu Tao nowadays. And he's just being low-key, just playing into whatever antics she's cooking up. I just find it really funny that one of the oldest gods in Teyvat is letting a young girl just drag him around and reeling him into her antics. But despite the comedic dynamic between Hu Tao and Zhongli, you can kind of tell also that Zhongli has a lot of respect for Hu Tao in her role as the Wangsheng funeral parlor director. Zhongli is also tied to a lot of characters in Liyue, like Keqing doesn't believe in Rex Lapis, like she doesn't like Rex Lapis, so that's already an interesting dynamic between the two. And then there's Child, obviously, like Zhongli and Child, back in the day they were like the dynamic duo. And then we learned that Child was obviously after Zhongli's gnosis, but then we learn at the end of the Liyue Archon quest that Zhongli had struck a deal with Senora and screwed Child over in the process, so he really outmaneuvered Child in that scenario, which is funny. And even outside of Liyue, Zhongli has really interesting dynamics with other archons. My personal favorite is Venti because they're like these two old men that is always bickering. They're old friends, so they're very familiar with each other. And Venti just likes to poke fun at Zhongli, who's retired now. And Zhongli seems to have a lot less patience for Venti because, well, they're old friends anyway, and Venti is pretty mischievous. So yeah, enough about Zhongli. Let me talk about other characters. Another thing that's kind of different in Liyue is also the government, like the Qixing. And we have several important characters that's part of the Qixing. The first one is Ningguang. I feel like Ningguang was such a big part of the Liyue Archon quest. It still baffles me that Ningguang is a 4-star, the same way like it baffles me how Kea is a 4-star. They're so important to the story. Like in Ningguang's case especially, she was like a key character in the Liyue Archon quest. But yeah, she's really cool. She's the richest character in all of Teyvat, I believe, and she is self-made. She's not a nepo baby. She has a rags to riches story that's never really gotten much spotlight in the game, unfortunately. But if you read through her character story, she's definitely intriguing and a fun character to follow. There's also Keqing, everyone's early main DPS back in patch 1.0. I think Keqing is one of the first overworked waifus in the game, and I like her just fine. And character-wise, like I mentioned before, I've always found Keqing interesting because she's one of the few people who doesn't like Rex Lapis at all, and she's very vocal about it, so good for her. But this has caused some conflict with other characters such as Ganyu. Ganyu is obviously a very devout follower of Rex Lapis, but who is also part of the Qixing, and understandably Ganyu disagrees with a lot of Keqing's view on Rex Lapis and what's best for Liyue. Ganyu herself is also a pretty interesting character. She's like half Adeptus, half human, and she's never really felt like she belonged in both worlds. But anyway, she has fought for Rex Lapis, so she's also quite old, and her struggles has always been feeling that she doesn't belong anywhere. And then we also have Xiao, who is one of my personal favorites. Xiao is also a devout follower of Rex Lapis. Now Xiao is a yaksha, he's a loner, he's the conqueror of demons, and he is a loner because he suffers from karmic debt, and basically he tries to stay away from people because he is scared that his karmic debt will bring ruin to whoever is near him. I think a lot of people misinterpret him as being edgy when he's actually not. This is a very old complaint that I have about Xiao. I even made a video way back in the day just to complain about this, but it makes me so sad that people say that Xiao is edgy because he's not. I don't know why his English dub makes him sound so edgy, but in the original Chinese version and also in the Japanese dub, he's actually really soft-spoken. Like, he's polite polite and he doesn't hate humans. He stays away from humans because he cares. Scaramouche is a lot more edgy than Xiao, if we're being completely fair, and I love Scaramouche too. But anyway, I love Xiao. I love his interactions with other characters in Liyue, including Hu Tao. Now, Hu Tao is one of the fun characters in Liyue. She has a group of friends that consist of Xiangling, Xingqiu, and Chongyun. But Hu Tao herself is pretty nuanced. She seems like this happy-go-lucky girl, but she's actually like very responsible. She takes her job very seriously. She has a very unique perspective on life and death, and that is a given because her job is to deal with death constantly. So that in itself makes her really interesting as a character, at least to me. I think Liyue has like one of the most developed 4 stars. The 4 stars of Liyue are the ones that has gotten a lot of screen time over the years. Maybe because of Lantern, right? I don't know, but I feel like I'm pretty familiar with most of the 4 stars. Like Chongyun, he's always with Xingqiu. They're a dynamic duo. He even has his own hangout. And Xingqiu has this entire arc about how he's a writer under a different name, and Albedo is his illustrator, and he made it to Inazuma for a festival. And Xiangling, obviously, if she's not on your team, she's on the Wanmin restaurant. She runs it with her dad. Liyue is just filled with super iconic characters. Like, when you think of Genshin, you automatically think of Liyue characters. Now, I'm debating if I should even mention this guy because technically he's not a part of Liyue, but a big part of Liyue is the introduction of the Fatui. Well, technically, the Fatui was introduced in Mondstadt because Signora shows up there, but they don't become a key plot point until Liyue, at least until Tartaglia was introduced. Tartaglia makes an appearance in the Liyue Archon quest, and he's there to take Zhongli's gnosis because that's his job. We also learn how the Fatui has full control of the Northland Bank in Liyue, and unlike Signora, Child is very friendly, so we also learn a bit more about the Fatui during our time in Liyue. We learn that not all of the Harbingers are hostile and out to kill us, even though Child does end up trying to kill us. But to be fair, he was just trying to do his job and to take the gnosis, and then he got played by Zhongli in the end anyway. And surprisingly, that was okay for him. He is actually pretty fond of the Traveler. But this is where we learn how ruthless the Fatui is. Like, Child as a Harbinger, he's willing to risk the lives of everyone in that harbor for the sake of the gnosis. Like, he was gambling. He didn't know if Zhongli was going to show up at the end of the Liyue Archon quest when he unleashed Osile, but he risked it all for his job. Through Child alone, we can already learn that the Fatui as a group most likely think that the end justifies the means. So talking about the quests, I feel like the Liyue Archon quest, it really wasn't the best in my opinion. I actually like Mondstadt's better because it's more straightforward. And just thinking back on the Liyue Archon quest, I just remember it being a lot of running around for Zhongli. Keep in mind, this is me speaking and recalling the quest after like 5 years of not replaying it, but that's how it sticks in my mind. The first 2 acts of the quest I felt like was not memorable at all. Well, I remember meeting Child and I remember meeting Zhongli, but nothing really memorable until the last act of the Liyue Archon quest. I feel like the last act was very action-packed and a lot of the characters coming together, working together to defeat Osile, and it was very hype. It felt like the stakes were high and the Fatui was also there, so we're not just up against this massive terrifying god, but we also have another faction to deal with. And this time, unlike Mondstadt, we didn't have the help of the Archon. Zhongli's not there. Well, he's watching, but he's not there. So the humans had to fend for themselves and they succeeded. Ningguang had to make a really big sacrifice at the end, showing us who she really is as a character. Even though she loves money, she's willing to risk the symbol of her wealth for the sake of her people. It's a good ending to the quest. I actually really like the ending of the Liyue Archon quest. And I think the fact that we had to face a god and also the Fatui like as a faction officially in Liyue is why it felt like that's where our adventure really started. Like, it officially started for the Traveler. And I also really liked the send-off after Liyue. There was a 1-year gap between between the release of Liyue to Inazuma, but when we were trying to get to Inazuma, the person who helped us get there was Beidou. Now, we haven't really seen a lot of Beidou up until that point. We later learned that she's been helping Kazuha, who's just escaped from Inazuma. And then when we were trying to go to Inazuma, she agreed to smuggle us in. Well, not smuggle, she knew Toma, but she was the reason we were able to get to Inazuma in the first place. So it was a nice send-off from Liyue to Inazuma. Don't quote me on this, but I think that no other nation does this. Up until Natlan, the traveler just kinda goes on to the next region by themselves. Like, sure, they get a send-off and a nice goodbye from the people of each nation, but I don't think someone actually traveled together with the traveler the way Beidou and Kazuha did back in Liyue. But don't quote me on that. I always felt like because we traveled with Beidou, who is a pretty iconic character, to a new region, that made it all the more exciting. But maybe that's just me. There's just a lot to love about Liyue as a nation, from the music, the scenery, the events. Not just Lantern Rite, there are other events, and obviously the characters, the culture. There's just so much that you can appreciate from Liyue. And I think what I love the most about it is I feel like it shows just how passionate the devs were when they were crafting Liyue. There's just so much heart and soul poured into Liyue, which is supposed to represent their home country. And I think that's beautiful. I feel like we as consumers can always tell when something is made with passion. And I feel like that's Liyue. Liyue is just a product of passion, and it will always remain very special in my heart. It might feel like home to some of you, but it feels like a first love to me. So yeah, tell me what do you think about Liyue. Other than Mondstadt, Liyue is probably the second most nostalgic region for me. Probably because it also launched during the same time, but there's just so many memories there. Like, I took so many photos during the Lantern Rite with my friends way back in 2021. And there's also the chasm. I completely forgot to mention the chasm, but there's an entire area there. There's entire lore about the Yakshas, about Xiao, about Yelan. And Liyue has always provided one of the best exploration experiences for me. Well, not the climbing, but from an exploration point of view, just discovering new sceneries and the calming music. It was always a pleasant experience. So yeah, that's how I fell in love with Liyue, and by extension with Genshin. Let me know what you think in the comments, and thank you for hearing me up. I hope this video was not too unstructured, but I definitely had fun just sitting down and talking to you all about Genshin, because I do miss it. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for listening. Subscribe if you want. If not, that's fine too. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.